welcome back to another episode of the Lonely Liberal Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Zankin, and I'm so happy to have you on this lovely Wednesday. We got a great show for you today. We are joined by the fabulous Stephanie Gagnon-Rodriguez to talk about the clean energy economy. Stephanie is a clean energy policy expert, and I'm so happy to have her on the show. She's a good friend of mine, and she is wonderful. So on the show, we're going to be talking about what is the clean energy economy, where is it, who does it affect, what do the people in it think, what are people around the country thinking about all these different changes to all the different policies that are affecting them and affecting their livelihood, and yeah, kind of like a more forward-looking, like what do we expect will happen with all this kind of turbulence with all of that. So we got a lot to talk about, and it's super interesting. It's such a great conversation. I can't wait for you to hear it. So without further ado, let's get to it. Alrighty, and we are here with Stephanie. Stephanie, what's up?
Hey, how are you?
I'm so happy to have you on the show. This is so exciting.
It's very exciting to be here. The show is so great.
I always say, like, I'm very lucky to have a lot of smart friends that I can bother and harass to get on these shows. So I'm glad you fell into that umbrella.
It's no bother at all. We're very happy to be asked.
Well, and it's super kind of timely that you're coming on when you're coming on with this government shutdown stuff, and we can talk about that later, but there's been so much in the news with the funding cuts, clean energy jobs, and all that stuff, and being my clean energy job kind of czar, as they like to say nowadays, I figured you'd be the person to talk to, because one of the things that, we heard about a lot with the Big Beautiful Bill and stuff is just how, a lot of this legislation that's getting cut and stuff like that is like kind of a nationwide thing. And this is a big part of what you're doing, right? Is just looking around, seeing these kind of regional economies. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, just kind of what are regional economies and what are clean energy economies? What do these words mean? Because I think people hear a lot about manufacturing and stuff like that, but it's kind of nebulous,
Yeah, definitely. Well, where to start? Let's start with the economy.
Yeah. Which I'm sure people don't even know what that word. Not our listeners are very smart, but it's one of those things. The word economy is tough to really wrap your head around because people think it's the stock market, people think it's jobs, unemployment, and people manipulate it for the terms that they want. But when we're talking about that, we're often talking about jobs and money growth.
Yeah. We're talking about jobs. We're talking about the way that money flows through a local area, or in this case, the national economy. You can talk about the global economy. We're talking about the way that different businesses interact with the market, or that consumers interact with those businesses. We're thinking about long-term how new technologies come online, how they go from being kind of small pilot scale to being something that you can produce at the mass commercial scale, and you can kind of serve the full market that's out there to buy those technologies and deploy them. So many, many different ways to slice and dice here.
But I think that's important, right? Because I think sometimes, you hear, oh, my number one issue is the economy, but a lot of that's just a feeling, you know what I mean? Because it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
The economy is vibes.
Vibes. But I'm glad.
So to take us a little bit more specific, when we're talking about the clean energy economy, that's really what my work is focusing on. And we're looking at the way that we produce energy in this country, how it's been for 150 years, how it's changing. So what we're doing right now to produce energy is different from what we were doing 100 years ago or even 50 years ago. And then we're looking ahead to where we're going to be in 10, 20, 50 years and what that is going to look like. And so the work that I'm doing is trying to figure out where we as America sit, where we fit into this conversation on all of these different ways that we produce energy. And then also at the community level, where do regular working people around America fit into this conversation? What did those jobs look like? What did they look like 50 years ago if you were working in a coal mining town or you're working on an oil rig? What do they look like today if you're installing solar or you're helping to build out carbon capture on a natural gas plant, or you're working on different kinds of grid modernization technologies, and then looking ahead, where do we need to be in the future so that we can make sure that we're producing energy that's sustainable, that is reliable, that meets the growing needs of our very, very energy-hungry economy, and it is something that people can afford to continue using to power their homes. So we can dive in wherever you want to go there. Many, many different ways to think about this energy economy. But really what we're looking at is what are we making right now? What do we need to be making? And how do the American people fit into this conversation?
No, I think that's a really nice way to put it. And it's interesting because out of all the kind of different executive orders and kind of noise that we've been hearing from the Trump administration, I thought, it hasn't really lined up with the actions taken, in my opinion. But Trump had declared it like an energy emergency, right? And like we need more energy and our grid isn't good and all that stuff. And there's a lot of truth to that. I did another episode kind of deep, called like, are we really in an energy emergency? And it kind of is, yes, so it is really a transformational moment regardless in terms of just the scale of power that's about to like be needed, I guess. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. This is the top issue that I've been hearing. So I work with people in states across the country. For the most part, I've been working in the Southeast in the last year. And what I'm hearing from especially these states in the Southeast is so many data center operators are begging for power. They're saying they're going to build new data centers. They're going to be massive installations. They're going to come online really, really soon. And they're going to gobble up as much power as they could use to feed them, it makes sense, right? Like we're looking at generative AI, which is incredibly power intensive. And we want to do it here in the United States. So we need to make sure that we can serve that power demand. But yeah, so I'm hearing that from people all across the states of how much more power are we going to need? How are we going to be able to meet that power demand? And then how are we going to be able to do it quickly? Because like you're saying, I think this energy emergency language is a little bit inflammatory, but it's definitely yeah, shocker. But it's definitely really keying in on some of these big problems, right? Our grid is overloaded. It's really hard to bring new generation online. Even some of the ways that we like to generate power, like building new gas plants or building new nuclear power plants, it takes a really, really long time to permit and to actually buy the equipment that goes into that and to set up a workforce. So it's really hard to bring on new generation very fast. It's a little bit easier to bring on renewables quickly. So I wish that this was a little bit more of the conversation.
That was going to be part of what I was going to talk. So yeah, no, totally. One of the things, there's so much to unpack here, but let's start with this. I think one of the things that has been a topic, for a decade now at least, is this exactly what you said about this transition from people working in, fossil fuels and kind of how do we move this group to not only keep their jobs, but get a better job and add more jobs. And we've seen a lot of success in that, but we've also seen some challenges. I remember, there's a lot of memes going around like, oh, they're giving coal miners computer science classes. Great. Like, they don't want this. You know what I mean? Like, they're like, I was doing this. I actually liked it. Why are you assuming I want to code now? And I do think like that discussion of, the kind of what you could call like a transferability. And you know what I mean? Have you noticed like a resistance to the chain, like transferring, like, what is your sense of like, I guess, the openness of a lot of communities, like perhaps in like West Virginia or something like that have historically relied on coal or something like that, moving into clean energy? Are they like feeling kind of, and I know this is a broad stroke question, there's varied opinions depending on who you talk to, but like, you know what I'm saying? Like, is this like an open thing or because that's a story that we get told a lot, either one way or the other.
Yeah, I think there's two things happening here. So on one side, there are a lot of people who have been working in fossil fuel dependent communities for a very long time, and they've relied on the jobs from this kind of industry. They've relied on the tax revenue in their town to power their schools and pave their roads. And they've also got this legacy in their family of working in these jobs. So whether that's a coal mining family, but even if you're looking at like working on an offshore oil rig, these are like high skilled, very physical jobs that you probably learned how to do from watching your dad or your uncle or your aunt do it. And so you have grown up thinking that this is, the path forward for you. And in many cases, these jobs are starting to go away. There is a global decline in coal production, especially in the Appalachian regions and in the Southeast United States, we're making a lot less coal than we used to. It's not as price competitive, so companies are starting to pull away from that. And what they're leaving behind is a tax revenue vacuum. They're leaving behind a lot of people who want jobs who can't get them anymore. In some cases, there is a lot of health impacts that have been connected to coal mining and other kinds of these kind of, dirtier industries that are really setting up a legacy in these communities. And so in that sense, we're talking to a lot of people who are saying, I don't really care what I do next. I want it to be something that will put food on the table for my family, that will make me feel fulfilled day to day, and that I feel like I'm ready to take on. Like they don't necessarily want to be told, okay, you have to be a coder. Is there another kind of an analogous job that they can get into from like offshore oil drilling? We've heard is really applicable to working on offshore wind platforms. There's other kinds of ways you can continue using the skills that you've built. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. You definitely know more about that than I do.
Yeah, no, you're right though. No, but that was a big story. What we talk about offshore wind all the time. No, yeah, totally.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's one of the things is like there's this job kind of vacuum being created. Or maybe not vacuum, but just like general decline in some of these more fossil-dependent towns where they're really looking for new opportunities. And then on the other side, I think for a while there was a narrative where we were saying, oh, you can't work in coal anymore. We're going to tell you about a better job that you can go into. And I think that was pretty harmful, honestly. And that's some of the pushback that I hear now is people saying, someone came to me and said they didn't like the job that I was doing and they were going to transfer me or transition me into a new kind of job. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be able to be in charge of my own destiny, my own job future. And so that I think we have to kind of meet people in the middle of those two things and really say like, hey, we've come up with some cool jobs that you can be a part of. If you want to access this training, this is something that you can do to change your career. But also, here are some other, ways that we can engage in these communities that used to be dependent on these other kinds of fossil industries that could help replace that lost revenue or create jobs in a way that's really promoting the well-being of their local economy and is really driven by what that local economy wants. It's not just like, experts coming in and saying, all right, time to learn how to code. Good luck.
Exactly. And I'm so glad you mentioned that because I've thought that for so long, and it's stuff you hear all the time when you talk to folks, is that this kind of attitude of like, oh, of course you'd want to leave this job, you know what I mean? Like this fossil fuel job. And they're like, not only do I not, I actually have a lot of pride in what I'm doing for all the reasons that you just laid out. Like, it's one of those things that I totally agree with you. I feel like it also has just led to a lot of like, it doesn't help the snobby know-it-all narrative. You know what I mean? Like when I don't think, and it's interesting, but
sorry to interrupt you here.
No,
let me give you an example from a conversation that we did in Kentucky last year, because I think this is a really, really cool example that I heard from some people locally.
Yeah.
So I helped put together a conversation with economic development professionals, state policymakers, heads of large businesses and small businesses, academic institutions, really kind of the people who make an economy go. We were in Kentucky. We were having a conversation about the future of the advanced energy manufacturing opportunity in Kentucky. And we were talking to a lot of people who are saying, we understand the situation with coal. We understand that this is probably not a long-term play for us to resurrect the coal industry and to just get all of our jobs back in the coal industry. What they were saying is we're experts in making energy. We've been working on this for 100 years. We've helped to power the entire U.S. economy by mining coal, by creating coal power plants, by really supporting this industry. So they were saying, help us find the new cutting edge technology that we can get involved in so we can stay at the front of the energy industry. Not like we want to hold back the transition or anything and make sure that coal is alive, but saying, can you use our skills that we've been really good at producing energy, we've been really good at mining and producing power and creating roads and bridges and other kinds of logistical infrastructure? How can we use that to be on the cutting edge of the new kinds of technology? Is that sustainable aviation fuel? Is that hydrogen? Is that other kinds of advanced energy solutions that we can really use our energy expertise, but we can also be at the front end of something? We're helping the economy to evolve. We're not just chasing after it. So that was pretty cool. That was a really neat conversation.
Interesting. Yeah. And I mean, it just makes you like, dang, like, of course, it's exciting, right? Like you hear that and you're like, well, let's go. Like, and it's super exciting. And it's It's interesting because there's been this push to manufacture things in the US again, right? This kind of rejection of the neoliberal, like offshoring manufacturing from not just Trump, from Biden too, right? That was a huge part of Biden and a big part of what the IRA was intending to do, right? It's effectively a giant, protectionist local content policy for a lot of things. We hear a lot about, you see memes on Instagram, like, oh, most of the red money was going to red states, blah, 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 blah. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, is it true that a lot of the money was going to the South and stuff like that? And why, I guess? And like, B, like, I know that that's not really the point, but like, yeah, like, can we talk a little bit about this kind of narrative and stuff like that? Because I think we just hear so much about that, especially after the big, beautiful bill got passed.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. This is like 90% of what I work on day to day.
Yeah, I figured. Yeah.
Really thinking about where people see themselves in this energy future, what that looks like for American workers, what that looks like for American economies. How can we start to produce a lot of these physical inputs for the energy economy here in the United States? Because for so long, we've been buying these items from other countries. A lot of them we've been buying from China. And we have been able to watch as the manufacturing industrial base of the United States has kind of gone away, gone overseas. There's not a lot of manufacturing jobs left in the U.S. And people are really challenged by that. I think people want to see things made in America. They think that it's a higher quality if it's made here. They think that they're following higher environmental standards, which could be true. They could be following higher labor standards. So maybe it'll be built by union workers, which is really important to people. And also people like to buy things that were made locally, right? Like we like to have something that was made next door.
100%.
So,
yeah. Totally.
So
Yeah.
I think that's driving a lot of this kind of identification of manufacturing in the United States as a priority for a lot of people, especially with the clean energy economy. Like if we're going to be building a lot of solar panels or wind turbines or electric vehicles, really thinking about how implementing these technologies can not just be a way to reduce our emissions or cut energy costs, but also a way to create jobs for people here at home. The IRA, I think, was starting to go down that path. There was a lot of provisions in the IRA that were saying you can get this incentive, but only if you make your products here in the United States. And I think the Trump administration really picked up on this in terms of the tariff regime that, has been evolving over the past couple of months.
Well
really
said.
Putting
That was
my diplomatic way of saying that.
You are a professional through and through. I can't.
Well, yeah, but okay, so he's stopping tariffs on other countries to try to make sure that what we're buying is something that that was made here in the United States, which a lot of economists would say that's one way to do it, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Yeah. So I think that's become an increasing focus for the administration, for Congress, and especially like we saw in the big beautiful bill you're referencing, they're tightening the fiat restrictions, which if that doesn't mean anything to you, it's because I live in DC and it is literally acronym soup all the time.
Yeah, I was gonna say for the non-DC audience, what are we talking about here? Yeah.
Let me throw some letters at you. So FIAC would be foreign entities of concern, and for some of the tax credits, Congress said, or Republicans in Congress, because it was their bill, said that it's fine, you can keep having the tax credit for some of these clean energy products, but they have to be made in a nation that's friendly to the United States. And there's a couple of countries that were worried about having products made by them here. So we're saying you can't apply the tax credit if they had too much of a hand in building the product. A lot of this is kind of targeting the battery industry in China. It's targeting the solar panel industry in China, basically saying we want to make that here in the United States instead of having to buy it from a single supplier abroad. Honestly, I think that this has driven a lot of the investment that we've been seeing in the United States, and that's borne out by many other economists, by a lot of experts that are working on this. But the issue is it's been changing very quickly. And that makes it really, really hard for investors to feel like they're going to get a return on their investment and to be willing to fund that next facility that's going to build it here. So that, I think, is like the mismatch here, is that They kind of agree. They want to see this stuff made here in the United States by American workers. They want to make sure that the funding that we're giving out to support these products really is going to American facilities. And at the same time, if it's not done in a way that's predictable, that's long-term and reliable, it's not going to be able to have the intended effect.
Exactly. It's the exact. I'm like nodding my head off my neck. But no, it's the great kind of paradox of the tariff use, in the sense that if you use tariffs for negotiation tactics, they're not on long enough to be reliable policy indicators. But then if you keep them long enough to generate revenue, that will work for a bit. But then as things get made at home, the revenue will go down. But if you use them for bargaining, then they are not long enough for either. So like they all kind of contradict each other. It's kind of like you can't have all three. And it feels like, at least from, looking in, like it seems very kind of pick and choose what the incentive is for the tariff. Like, you know what I mean? Like they're being justified for those kind of either one of those three options. And then what that does, like you said, right, is the lack of consistency is what kills all energy, not just renewable, anything. Because I think one thing that people don't realize, and it's something that I think, anyone in this industry, will talk about a lot, is that like oil and gas projects really need consistent policy too, because it's so much money and it takes a long time to build these things. So yeah, it's hard to build infrastructure when things change every other week and you don't know how much you're going to actually make on your returns because the policy could change, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Spot on. And I hear that from companies a lot at every stage of development. So that could be startups that are trying to secure funding to build their first pilot line. That could be companies that are starting to produce, but they really want to scale up. But that's also these like mega multinational companies that are building billion-dollar facilities here in the US. They're also having trouble finishing the investments that they're making, or being certain enough to make more investments here in the US, because they know that this political space is going to change very quickly, that it might change on a partisan line, that it might not be something that they can rely on over the next few months, whether that's the tariff side of things or that's the permitting side of things. And so being able to have that certainty, they're just not able to make those investments here. And what we're hearing from some of these companies is that they're choosing instead to invest abroad. So they're saying, we're a multinational. We can build anywhere. We're going to go somewhere where we know what to expect on the tax credit space or on the tariff space or in the other kind of policy area. And they're just going to go, and we're just not going to get that investment.
I'm so glad you just said that, because it's something I ramble on about a lot on the show, is that I think a lot of people, when they think of other countries, in particular countries that they've, labeled third world or developing or whatnot, they think of them as being really, really underdeveloped. But there are modern cities in almost every country in the world. You know what I mean? Like Nairobi is a mega modern metropolis. You know what I mean? And like they can build and afford major projects. And I think there's this kind of almost like cultural feel that like it's either the Western countries or bust in terms of where companies will spend their money, because that may have been true in like the 60s. But like I think there has maybe been a slower adaptation to like just how much wealth has been generated throughout the world over the last like 20, 30 years. But anyway, that's another topic for another day. But it affects here though, because like you said, like I don't think you had like, oh, if you don't build it here, we'll just go to the Philippines. You know what I mean? Or we'll just build this in Vietnam. Like that wasn't as a viable option in the 60s and 70s, when a lot of these types of economic theories were kind of, thought of, for the first time. Anyway, so where would you say like, because like you do see these regional hubs, right? You kind of have like the Gulf Coast area, the Northeast, the West Coast, the Midwest. Like what are these, like, is that right? Like where would you say are like the regional clumps, and what does it even, I guess, like mean? Like, is it like economies of scale? Is it like a Silicon Valley type thing? Like how much do these states work with each other, or is it usually just like in a state?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And the answer that I give you is probably not even the same as the answer as the next person would give you. So no, this is very subjective.
Yeah. We're just talking.
Yeah, but yeah, okay. So I've been looking a lot into regional clusters of the kinds of advanced clean energy industries that we've been talking about today. And that partially leads into that there are states that are geographically close to each other that have similar goals, similar makeups, similar kinds of expertise, and they tend to work together to build out a regional supply chain for an industry. And this is true of many different kinds of industries. Like you might see aerospace kind of clustered around the Pacific Northwest. A lot of that is because there's a couple of really, really big companies that are working on that. And then that kind of spills into other expertise in the local universities. There's small companies that are part of the supply chain that help to provide small pieces that go into the bigger planes or spaceships or whatever they're building. And it's you have to transport things to get there. So they want to be located very close geographically to where they're going to be producing the final product. And this is true for the clean energy economy. In some ways, it's one of the more unique sectors that this is true for because a lot of this infrastructure is very large.
Yeah.
Like you can probably tell us a little bit about how the offshore wind supply chain is shaped. But these are massive pieces of
Incredibly
equipment.
huge. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to preempt you on offshore wind, but
No. But you're so right. And it's so unique because all of a sudden now you're thinking about port sizes and crane sizes and vessel fabrication speeds and all this stuff that you're so right. It is pretty unique to the new age kind of clean energy economy, I'd say, right?
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so this infrastructure is so big, like you can't put an offshore wind blade on a truck. You have to put it on a boat. So that really limits where you can make those blades, right?
Totally.
And then it encourages people who are going to build their companies that are part of that supply chain and encourages them to locate closer. So I'm working right now on the battery industry, and we're doing a lot of this work in the Southeast, in part because there's a lot of really large gigafactories or battery plants that are coming to the Southeast that will really anchor this geographic cluster of investment in the battery supply chain. Part of these investments are actually driven by the IRA. So shout out to 2 minutes ago, we were talking about how federal policy can really incentivize building things here in the United States. And we saw that there were huge battery facilities announced, especially in the Southeast, in regions that had the land that could accommodate them. They have cheap power. They have a skilled workforce that's been working in the automotive industry for a very long time. And they're geographically pretty easy to get back and forth from. There's a lot of highways. There's really good port infrastructure. There's a lot of railroads. So it's pretty easy to move stuff between the different factories that are being built there. So that tends to be why it's why I'm really interested in regional clusters, but it's also why we're starting to see this infrastructure pop up geographically linked across different states. And you asked me earlier if the states are working together on this. It depends.
Sometimes they get moody, right? I mean, I was working on a project with, and I don't care, the North Carolina government, state government, and South Carolina state government, and it was funny. They have let's just say a friendly rivalry. These Carolinas, they were like, it was very interesting, the tension, but also love at the same time that a lot of the government leaders, and I was like, no wonder why you guys aren't one big Carolina anymore. I mean, like it's intense, but yeah, it's interesting because why should we reward you for putting it in another state and stuff like that? But yeah, elaborate on that.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to speak to the North Carolina, South Carolina.
No.
But I am from Massachusetts, and I will say Massachusetts and Connecticut have a very similar energy, so that's very relatable.
Totally.
But yeah. So a lot of times, there are several compacts or regional coalitions or partnerships that are overt announced partnerships that cross state boundaries. And in the Southeast, a lot of them, there's partnerships between universities or there's partnerships between economic development agencies, and they're all trying to help stand up this clean energy economy or clean energy industries in the Southeast. The challenge is when everyone's trying to land the huge facility, right? If everybody wants a gigafactory, we are going to run out of gigafactories very quickly.
Yeah, it's true.
And this is true in the offshore wind space too, right? Not everyone is going to be able to build the blades or the nacelles. You're going to kind of max out what you need for that in a couple of factories. And so what is challenging and what I think we can really encourage states to do is for them to be more collaborative on building out that holistic supply chain. So, okay, we have a couple of gigafactories in this area. Why don't we collaborate on trying to get materials processing here? Or if you're looking at like offshore wind, like why don't you guys make the blades and we'll make the pilings that hold the blades up, and these people will make the cables that tie them underseas. And so everybody gets a piece of the pie. They all get some of that investment. They get the jobs benefits. And also they're helping to build out this huge industry that couldn't just be held by one state.
Totally. And batteries is interesting because batteries are, as they say, so hot right now. I feel like it's kind of one of the universally accepted kind of things. Like, okay, like batteries are a part of the future one way or another. And one of the things, I guess, in this that I just don't know enough about is, one of the concerns people have with batteries, right, is the mining, the material you use, like the sourcing of the lithium or whatever it is. Is that like something that the U.S. can do independently? Like how, I guess, and maybe you don't know the answer to this. This is just me kind of going off script here, but like how, how dependent are we in the battery industry itself? Just because it does feel like, you see all these, like, not just law policies and stuff, but like you said, major investments at these giant gigafactories. Like, it really is like where a lot of money is flowing.
Yeah, definitely. No, this is what I spend my day on right now.
Great, I asked the right person. All right, good, yeah. Nice. All right, good.
And I will say, I have colleagues who are a lot smarter than me on this that I go to when I ask them questions. But so I'll do my best to paraphrase what they would have said. But so right now there are only a few places that you can get battery materials from. And that's like, there are a lot of places that you can get lithium from, but there's not a lot of places you can get refined battery grade lithium from, right? So there's a little bit of a difference of like who makes the raw materials versus who makes the raw materials that are high enough quality and have gone through the right kind of processing to put into a battery. And that's part of the challenge of like, we can only source them from one place. China controls pretty much all of the graphite production, which is what you need to make the anode in a battery, like one of the essential pieces that makes a battery work. And so there are other companies that are looking at building out this capacity in other places, including here in the United States, but it's going to take a very, very long time for that to get up and running, especially if we're staying in this uncertain policy environment.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, so there's some companies that they're either already operating or they're about to open their doors and sell battery-grade graphite that's made here in the United States, which is very, very cool. But it takes a long time to qualify that, to make it ready to go into a battery, to make sure that everyone agrees that it's the right quality to go into a battery, and then to build or to make enough of it that you can serve the entire U.S. battery industry. So in the meantime, we have to buy it from, exactly. We have to buy it from somewhere else.
That makes sense.
Whether we can mine it all here, I think is another question. And it's also a question of like, do we have to mine it all here? There's existing lithium resources, for example. There's existing graphite resources. Rare earths come up a lot. There's a lot of rare earth resources here in the United States that we could mine and could use to supply to this industry. And also, there are a lot of other countries that we have good relationships with, like Australia and Chile, who already mine this stuff. They have a lot of resources. They're really good at it, and we can just buy it from them. So
yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's a bit of a question of like how far up into the supply chain do we want to be in charge of? How much of this do we want to mine here in the United States versus can we process it here so we're adding a lot of value to it without having to dig it out of the ground? Can we make the components themselves that go into the batteries here instead of having to, go all the way through the supply chain? We're kind of importing some of the materials and then we're making the components and then we're making the batteries. So that's what I'm working on. If any of your listeners have thoughts on this, I'm happy to take them.
Yeah, please write in. And also, I'm so interested. Oh my God, I might hijack this conversation to this. I mean, it's just so fascinating because it's one of the ones that has such a like visually like understandable supply chain because you have the mining and the people, and like I feel like it's very easy to kind of visualize like kind of a like material to development process, where other things there are like little parts and bits and it's a little bit more complicated. Not to say it's not complicated, but you know what I mean. One of the things too that I think like kind of frames a lot of manufacturing conversations, and particularly with clean energy, is this kind of like, we don't want to create another Rust Belt, like, you know what I mean, like what happened with cars, right? Basically, like what happened in Detroit, Cleveland, all these places. Like I think there's a lot of fear in people that like if we push wrongly or we push too soon, we could end up having this very similar thing happen to what happened to our auto manufacturing, and like kind of a panic about that. Do you find that the places that are kind of best suited for this are places that have gone, like, are they feeling like a little bit of whiplash from like previously being burned from manufacturing and now they're like, ugh, you told me this last time? Or does it tend to be places that are already kind of cruising with manufacturing and they're like, oh, why would we change? Or, yeah, you know what I mean? Like, oh yeah, sure, we're down. Like what is the kind of environment, I guess, in that way for these places often? I know it's different for each place, but like in general.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really, really important question, and definitely something that I really think we need to be asking people about and talking to people in these communities about. It can vary. There are some communities that have felt that companies have really taken advantage of them. So I've spoken to communities in Appalachia who kind of feel like they've been dragged along on different boom and bust cycles of different kinds of industrial development. Like, okay, great, we're all gonna be in fracking now, and then maybe not. Maybe we'll all make cars. Maybe not.
Exactly.
Right. And so a lot of these communities feel like you're saying they feel pretty burned by kind of being at the whims of the global market. And another new next big thing we can tell them, like, yes, EVs are the next big thing, and I'm pretty sure that we're right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it's not fair, right, to just go in and say like, yeah, this is the next big thing. You're gonna make it all. So I do think it's really important to be listening to where communities want to be in this transition or this opportunity and where they really see themselves playing a role. And if they're interested in being a part of building out the next big manufacturing hub for whatever, batteries, EVs, offshore wind components, then it's a really, really good opportunity to work with them and make sure that that happens in a way that really celebrates the community's strengths and celebrates what they see as their own opportunity. Um, in some places, people are really excited to get back to work.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, so in Kentucky, I was already talking about this example, but we were talking to some people who are basically saying, I just want to put food on the table for my kids. I want to have good roads. I want to have a good school for my kids to go to. So yeah, put me in the game. How do I drive to the facility? How do I get there? How do I operate the robots that are that are running
Yeah.
the the factory line? Put me in the game. So yeah, I do think it's very unique to communities. I think a lot of people are very excited by this opportunity. Some of them are very wary of whether it's here to stay, and that really puts it on us as people who are proponents of these technologies. It puts it on policymakers at the federal level to be thinking about their constituents' best interests. It also puts a lot onto local policymakers and economic developers and the people who make a community run to really listen to their people, to support them, to invest in long-term sustainable, not like environmentally sustainable, but long-term sustainable practices that will make sure that these industries are here to stay.
Yeah, I think it's a big part of the story of, because now that I'm doing this podcast and whatnot, I'm more in tune to political social media than ever before, unfortunately. And one thing you see a lot is like, why would, a congressperson or a senator from a red state not be in support? Like, how are they going directly against their constituents? Or like, why are constituents voting for people going directly against their interests and stuff like that? And it's really a lot more, I feel like a lot more nuanced than that because the way it's framed and stuff like that, and tax incentive policy isn't the most straightforward thing. It's not like everyone's like, oh, of course you changed the PTC and now I won't be able to like it's hard, it's complicated. Do you like? I guess it's twofold. One, what I would ask you is, do you feel like the jobs that this that we make in the US for the clean energy economy or just in manufacturing in this kind of world in general, like, can they serve kind of a more broad global market too? Like, or will they only be competitive in the US, do you think? Like, how do you think that relationship is? And how, like, I guess, how much do you think that plays into like the sustainability of the jobs? Like, is the US insular enough that like they can just be competitive within its own little world? Does that make sense?
I think so.
Yeah, it's a hard question. And like
It's yeah, it's a hard question.
yeah, yeah. Like, what do you think? I mean, it's hard to have a definitive answer, right? But like, what do you think about that? Like, can like a battery made in Kentucky, like, you know what I mean, be competitive enough that it can kind of survive the political mood swings of the U.S.? You know what I mean? Like, because what
Yeah.
we don't want to lead them down a boom. You know, the boom bust stuff is a disaster. You know what I mean? Like, that really can wreck these communities. So I think that is part of the story, right? That it has to be able to weather this. You know what I mean? The drama, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think that that's a big piece of this conversation is thinking about the global market for these products and if things produced in the United States can serve them. And I think they can. I think there's a lot of evidence that things that are made in the US often get exported to other places. We make a ton of cars here that we sell to Europe and we sell to other emerging markets and we sell to Canada and Mexico, right? So to think that we could then make EVs that we export to all of those markets, I think is a pretty quick, easy leap.
Yes,
And that
totally.
they would be high quality, they'd be cost competitive. They'd be, technologically competitive with what else is out there. They tend to be a little bit more expensive for obvious reasons than some of the vehicles produced in, say, China, which tends to they've kind of really cracked the affordable electric vehicle. But yeah, no, these technologies, these materials that we're making here can definitely be exported and really play on the global stage, which I think creates a huge opportunity for us to serve not just the American demand for these products, but the global demand. So even if like in the United States, the projections that we had for how many EVs we're going to sell are going down a little bit because the tax credits have changed, then there's still an opportunity to meet this massively growing and exploding demand for EVs abroad in the near term while the U.S. kind of catches up.
Totally. And I mean, yeah, it was kind of a little bit of a leading because I think that too. Yeah, I mean, like, you get planes, you have weapons, you have, like those like farming machinery, like, these pretty complex things that we're selling tons and tons of, and it didn't seem to matter. So yeah, no, totally. In fact, usually the more advanced manufacturing things are easier to justify the high cost. Like, look at what Germany does. It's super expensive and they sell a ton of random stuff. But yeah, one thing too that I guess was interesting is in the offshore wind industry, and I appreciate that it's slightly different because it's a maritime industry a bit. You often hear about skills, like training programs, skill shortages, stuff like that. How do you feel like when you're going around and talking to people and like seeing these stuff, like does it feel like there's like a skill shortage or like a training issue or stuff like that, or is it more of just like a lack of a financial incentive slash like kind of interest? Like how, like, what do you think about that? Like the skill kind of workforce kind of bit of it.
This is one of my favorite topics.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I'm so glad that we got here.
yeah. Look at me go! Look at
Yeah,
this
I mean,
podcast host. Are you kidding me? Look at it.
killing it.
Yeah,
Killing
look
it.
at this. Easy money.
Yeah, you're gonna have to cut me off because I can talk about this all day.
We're here. We're here for it. This is what we're here for. We want to hear you. We want to listen to your brain.
Well, yeah. So I've been talking to a lot of people about this for at least 5 years through this program I've been working on regional economic development, but also way before that, trying to figure out what people see as the biggest barriers to a ready, skilled, excited workforce that can serve not just like this year's workforce needs or 5 years from now, but can be ready to really power the economy for the next 20 years. And there are a couple of different things that I think are causing us challenges that a lot of really smart people are working on. So one, if we're thinking in the near term, like the immediate jobs that we need to fill, there are really new kinds of jobs out there to support these advanced energy technologies that we don't really know how to do yet. And that's not like, you know, I don't know how to do them. It's that there's people in the United States, like no one in the U.S. makes
you
them
and me,
yet, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't rely on you and I to build manufacturing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, I know there was a really recent high-profile example of this in the news. Like, in the battery space, there's a lot of companies that have been doing this in Korea for 20 years, but they haven't been doing it here in the U.S. So there aren't a ton of workers who know how to operate the equipment in a gigafactory that makes batteries. And so what we needed to do was bring workers who've been doing this for 20 years here to the U.S. to train the American workers that are going to be working long-term in the factories. And we also need, I know the companies are doing this, they also needed to build a pipeline of people who know what this job is. They understand what they need to know to do it. They know if they need a associate's degree or bachelor's degree or a trade certificate. And then they understand how that fits into their opportunity to get into this job. So in the near term, we're thinking about how do we connect open job opportunities and employers looking for people to work for them to a ready workforce that understands what those skills are and how to get them and how to demonstrate that they have those skills. And there's a huge gap there that a lot of really smart people are working on. A lot of community colleges, a lot of workforce development experts, a lot of labor unions are working on trying to identify what these skills are and then how to get people into those jobs very quickly. Really, really important work that needs to be done. This can also be like reskilling or upskilling. You might hear that a lot in this area.
You hear those all the time, those terms. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you've got somebody who is working on creating a gas-powered car and they want to work on EVs instead, it's pretty easy to train them how to shift into a different role. Or if they're, they're not used to working with robotics, but they have experience working on traditional manufacturing, there's opportunities for them to learn how to use robotics. So that is super cool. There's a ton of work happening on that. That's what we need right this second, right now. Long term, there are some flags that are coming up about is our workforce of people who are going to be graduating high school in the next 10 to 20 years, are they going to be ready for these jobs? And that, to me, is the really, really interesting question, because what I hear a lot from experts on this is that it's not just about can you run a robot or do you know how to weld? It's also about have you been raised in the education system in a way that lets you learn new skills quickly, because we don't know what the future of manufacturing is going to look like in 20 years. AI might be running everything. And so can you adapt quickly? Can you figure out how to learn new processes? Can you innovate? Can you work well with other people to solve problems? That's a big thing that's coming up that I'm really concerned about, because I hear this a lot from employers, but I'm not seeing a ton of it coming into the K-12 system that we really need to be focusing on today.
Yeah, I mean, you're preaching the choir. Yeah, totally. I think that, I mean, I remember I was working on for a West Coast offshore wind development project kind of team, and they were asking me how many jobs they could claim the project would make. And you're thinking about it, and you're like, okay, this is a fictitious project 10 years from now using fictitious like hypothetical technology, like with a current, 10-year-old, you know what I mean, working by the time it gets built, right? And it's something that they often call like opportunity to influence, because not only do you have to build the school, which takes time, or like design the curriculum that takes time, you have to like do it in relationship to when the development of the projects would be, and then assume that they also have the experience that you would have by the time that like kind of floodgate triggers, in a way, if that makes sense. So you're so right. It's so early days that like it almost has to be like a cultural shift. Like that's what I've heard. I've heard the exact same thing. And it's the longer winded the projects are, like a long-term offshore wind project or a big battery project, I'm guessing, or like a nuclear, the longer it goes out, right? Like the younger it must be, because the long leeway of things, right? So yeah, it's super interesting to think about like how the current 10-year-olds are going to have to like fix all this in a way. And are we designing programs in a way that can, like you said, get them not only involved, but like pushed in a way that kind of makes sense? I don't know how many people are going to college right now thinking like, I want to do offshore wind, like very little, right? Like, and that matters. And that's because of their K through 12 experience. Anyway, yeah, no, that's also something I've spent a lot of time thinking about. It's interesting. I want to talk about kind of the current state of affairs, but in a way that isn't too dramatic. but like still being realistic. I have two kind of thoughts, and I'll ask the first one first. So obviously we saw the IRA have its glory days, and then we've seen it now shift into whatever the big beautiful bill has become, which I really wish there was a new name for it. I cannot stand calling it the big beautiful bill every time. And
we're calling it OB3 here in DC.
Okay, I'm gonna start calling it OB3 because I my heart can't take calling it, glubbering those words out. But anyways, OB3. I guess, can you give us kind of like a panic meter score, I guess, in a way, of how much do you think this piece of legislation derails kind of some of the investment and progress that we have been seeing? I don't mean in the sense of like, will it ever get built or like, will it ever happen? Because no, I'm still optimistic that it will, because I think that's just the way the world's going. But like, yeah, like, can you give us a little, like, just kind of like, not me screaming and hollering from the rooftops always that things are false sky, not chicken littling me like I always do, like kind of viewpoint, like, or maybe it is chicken little, maybe it is the sky's falling. But yeah, what do you think about this? Like, is this change very, very consequential to a lot of the progress we've seen over the last decade, I guess, in the clean energy economy?
Yeah, it's not good. Definitely.
Yeah, so we agree.
It's not good.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
That's
I know.
I know. I listen to your podcast. I know.
You know.
Yeah, it's not good. Yeah, there's a lot going on here. Definitely the tax credits that were in the IRA. This is a huge challenge because they were initially passed to be in place for 10 years, and people were making investment decisions based on their continued existence. And I think one of the really big examples that, just like breaks my heart, I knew that it was going to be destroyed or taken down in the OB3, but I was just so sad to see it, is the 30D tax credit, which is the clean vehicle rebate. This is like $7,500 that you get back when you buy an electric vehicle. And this was where they put the domestic content requirement. So they said, you only get the full credit if your vehicle has a certain percentage of it that was made here in the United States. And that percentage increases every year. So they're encouraging you to onshore your EV production in the U.S. as we get closer to 2030. And the other thing that they did on this tax credit was they said you can only claim it if your vehicle MSRP is under a certain threshold. So they really kind of set like a lot of boundaries around EVs to get this tax credit, which did so in a way that makes it more affordable for families to get one, and that also encourages the production of them here in the United States. And, we knew that this was going to be really, really easy for Republicans to count it as a political win. Their voting base is really opposed oftentimes to electric vehicles. They're, often used as a punchline. So it was pretty easy for them to kind of get rid of this tax credit. But it makes me very sad that it is gone. So another thing that they did was a lot of these other tax credits that they phased down, they go away over time. So they go away in 2026 or they go away in 2029. And the EV tax credit just ended a couple of days ago. So they said that it would end on September 30th. So they really didn't give a lot of time to adjust to this pretty significant change. And I think it really didn't reflect how much of American manufacturing investment was happening because of that tax credit. So I definitely think, there's a way forward for batteries, and I can talk about that in a second. But for the electric vehicle industry, it's really, really challenging to an industry that was just starting to get off the ground here and now has to pivot very quickly. People are losing literally like billions of investments across EVs and other clean energy technologies because of the rapid change to this tax credit regime. So it's pretty bad.
It's terrible. It's sad. Like, no, I feel sad. Like, sadness is what I feel. Like, it's anger, obviously, and angst, but like a lot of sadness because, these are just people who are losing their jobs for no reason. Anyway, in my opinion. But anyway, continue.
But, okay, I do want to point out a silver lining.
Yes.
Which is that when the IRA passed in 2022, it passed on party lines. Democrats were the champions of these tax credits. They wrote the credits. They put them in the bill. No Republicans voted for them. When we came to the Big Beautiful Bill, or OB3, and we were looking at the tax credits again, a lot of them were preserved or changed a little bit. Like I was talking about the foreign entity of concern restrictions, or, phased out earlier, but a lot of them were preserved. And Republicans, that was a Republican bill. Only Republicans voted for that bill. So, and a couple of them chose not to vote for it because of the clean energy tax credit changes. So we've definitely seen a shift, I think, in just the baseline of who is supporting these measures, which is really, really important. So that's like the first thing that I think is one of the silver linings. The second thing that I think is a really interesting piece of this. So if you're looking at the technology neutral tax credit, or the ITC, they did phase it down very early for solar and wind, but they kept it going out longer for battery storage, for geothermal, for nuclear, for these clean technologies that are high priority for Republicans, which, I think it's a really clear signal that there's a lot of political will behind this. Especially on the battery side, I think it demonstrates that there's a recognition of the role that batteries play on our grid and the importance of building them out very quickly. So I do think that that's another silver lining. And, all the other things that happened with the uncertainty around OB3, I think that was a big thing that I've been pointing to lately as like, this actually is a really good sign for this industry. And then just the last thing that I think is really important, this is something that I and my organization were working on really, really hard, was really tying those clean energy investments to on-the-ground jobs and economic growth in states. And a lot of Republican policymakers who were negotiating the bill actually cited that when they were having conversations about how to restructure the tax credits. They're saying, my constituents actually want to keep this because it's creating jobs, because these big companies are investing in our communities. So let's see how we can keep that investment while also achieving our priorities. So I do think there are a few silver linings that, when the dust settles and we're looking back on this bill, we'll understand we're actually like a pretty good sign. But yeah, on the whole, the loss of some of these tax credits is pretty devastating.
That was so well put, by the way. You said what I would have tried to say a lot better than I would have tried to say, which I really appreciate it. That was really, I think, just so smart. It's interesting because, it's not as good as the IRA was, but it's better than it was beforehand, I think, like in a lot of ways, because like you said, there is a real need for batteries and nuclear and stuff. I don't think those are nothing. I do feel horrible. I mean, obviously for the wind and solar stuff, but it's interesting with the EVs too, because like I was talking about, I've done a lot of work in South Carolina, and they have a lot of EV investment that you would think would play a pretty big role in their community with their. People don't I don't think a lot of people realize how much cars manufacturing it happens in South Carolina. It's amazing. I feel like in general, a lot of the country's manufacturing skills kind of like isn't almost like celebrated enough. I kind of feel like there's so much focus on auto, like just what happened in Detroit a lot of the time, that I think it's sometimes overlooked that we're still like a real manufacturing powerhouse in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? And it's not like this country is like zero. I don't know. Anyway, so I'm going to end it on one kind of, not end it, but my kind of umbrella final question. And it's kind of like a forward-looking question that I've been thinking a lot about, and I'm really interested to hear your take on, is I think at least that this stuff is an inevitability. Economics, obviously you and I care about the same stuff. We care about this policy. We care about the economic stuff. And it just seems to be there from a pretty just like objective level to some extent. It does worry me, though, that I want the U.S. to be leaders in this stuff. I feel like we had an opportunity to be a really big leader in a lot of this space, and I don't want it to be a world where we're playing catch up in 10 years to random country X, right? Do you think, I guess, like, my question is to you, do you feel like this setback, because whether we want to like try to like brush it better, like it is a setback, I think, no matter what, like it maybe not horrible, but it's a setback, I think, is big enough to the point where it'll be really, really challenging for us to be like leaders in this space in the long term? Or do you think like there is a real, like, we can shake this off in a way that we can still kind of have that position? Because it does feel the cynical version of me is worried that now we're going to be like lagging behind a lot of countries when we really didn't have to be in like 10, 20 years from now. But I'm really curious what you think about this.
Yeah, I mean, so I am a defiant optimist.
Good. We need people like that in DC, so I'm glad. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's complicated. I think that there is a real future for the clean energy industry here in the United States, and it might not look like what we thought it would look like, under the Obama years or the Biden years when we were pretty, bullish on climate policy. I think it's probably going to be on the innovation side. So we're innovating new kinds of battery chemistries, not to always come back to batteries. It's just what I'm working on right now.
No, and batteries are, I said it earlier as a joke, but they really are incredibly,
Yeah.
I mean, batteries are like, there's no way around it. They're the future. So yeah, it's a good topic to be focused on anyway.
Hot topic. And one of the cool things about what's happening here in the United States is that we're trying to catch up with other countries on the lithium ion side of things, but there are other kinds of chemistries that you can use in batteries that are more efficient, that don't use conflict minerals, that charge faster, or that you can use for longer duration storage. And there's a lot of really cool innovation happening on that in the United States. And I think that that's probably, if you're thinking like, did we win the race in 50 years? That's probably where we're going to see that, is that not just that like we made the most batteries, but we made the best batteries. So that I'm seeing a lot of optimism around. It's definitely going to depend on what the administration and Congress does in the next couple of years, policy-wise, that whether they, support the development of this industry or try to stymie it a little bit more. But yeah, I think innovation there's new kinds of nuclear innovation that companies across the U.S. are working on, like small modular reactors and other kinds of advanced nuclear. That's something that has support from the current administration, that had support from the previous administration. That really seems to be something that companies are very excited about. So that might be an area, if I was talking about like environmental innovation, 10 years ago, I probably would not have put nuclear in that box.
No, yeah.
Just because of the way that, societal perceptions of it were. But I think that that's really shifted now. And so that's an opportunity for us to be leaders. I mean, it's going to be hard to come back from the gut punch.
This is a gut punch.
Huge swing between tons of support and then kind of yanking the rug out from under people. But also, I think there is a lot of will behind this. There's a lot of companies who have bet a lot of money on this technology and the deployment of it here in the United States. There are a lot of people who are going to school to work on these technologies, to like come out with new ways to produce these materials, to invent the next big, fastest charging battery, the best wind turbine that's going to be the most efficient. And that, I think, is also, an opportunity for hope. So hopefully I don't sound like I have my head under a rock, but I remain defiantly hopeful that people are going to see that this is a job opportunity. This is a opportunity to grow the economic and the physical resilience of their communities, that they understand the role that clean energy needs to play in the global economy, and that will get back on track.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right. And it tracks with kind of how previous things have grown over the time, right? Like the innovation space tends to be, where it's the double-edged sword of like the American ego, right? Where we are so risky that we come up with great ideas, but then we also do crazy stuff. And right now we're kind of in the latter. But nevertheless, I think it's interesting. And I mean, yeah, the battery stuff is super cool. We might have to have you back on for just a battery-only episode, because I'm wicked into batteries too, and like the sodium and the chloride. And it's so cool, like thinking about that. And yeah, I mean, I've talked to a lot with different renewable developers, and they basically, I think one dude told me like, yeah, we're just looking to put a battery on basically anything we possibly can. So yeah, it's definitely the future. So my God, this is so interesting. Yeah, we're going to have you back. You're coming back whether you like it or not. No.
It was fun to chat with you, Nick. This is awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much. If anyone has any questions for Steph, just reach out to me or to us, right? At the Lonely Liberal podcast at gmail.com, and we will get her back and we will talk and we will not bug her too much, though. Thank you so much.
I'll talk about this any day, anytime, except next week when you're getting married.
I know.
So enjoy that.
I know, right? What a life. What a world we're living into. What a time. Just change is in the air. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Bye. And that's our show, folks. Thank you so much for listening today. If you like the show, please give it a 5-star review on either Apple Podcast, wherever you listen, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever. It would be really appreciated. If you're listening on YouTube, leave a comment. Love to know what you think. Or you could write us in at thelonelyliberalpodcast@gmail.com. Like I said before, no show this weekend as your boy's getting married. And that means next week will also be off, and then we will be back to normal the week after. So a little bit of a break, but stick around. Hang tight out there. We'll be all right. And I'll be back to talk more shit in the future. All right. I'll talk to you later. Bye.